Good morning, afternoon, or evening, AP Language and Composition students of the 2021-22 school year. I'm so happy you are with me today. What you're looking at is an interactive video lecture done through Edpuzzle. So you'll see a few questions pop up here and there to kind of make sure that your understanding is there, to make sure that you're kind of staying engaged with the material. Remember, at any point, if you come across a question, you can't advance past it, obviously, but you can rewind anywhere in the presentation to review that material to make sure you understand it fully before moving on to the next. So today's topics are the fundamental cornerstones of what this class is. AP Lang and Composition, or AP Language and Composition, is all about the idea of rhetoric. It's persuasive speech. It's the art of getting people on your side or accomplishing other purposes via writing or speaking. So we'll get into the specific definitions of rhetoric in just a second. But today's topics are what are rhetoric, and by extension, what is rhetorical analysis, and what is the rhetorical situation, and Space Cat. Ooh. All right, so again, be prepared for a few questions here and there. Otherwise, let's get right into it, shall we? All right, so rhetoric and rhetorical analysis. Okay, what are we dealing with here? So rhetoric is defined academically as the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, especially the use of figures of speech and other compositional techniques. You might also have heard of rhetoric defined this way. More cynically speaking, often referred to as empty rhetoric, this is language designed to have a persuasive or impressive effect on its audience, but it's often regarded as lacking in sincerity or meaningful content. In other words, there is a light side and a dark side of rhetoric. It's like the Force, sort of. You can get people behind a purpose, behind a cause. You can convince people to vote for an idea. You can convince people to think a certain way, or even convince them to like get up off the mat and act well, well, and get themselves in order and stuff like that. More cynically speaking, you can get people to believe in an idea that is, morally bankrupt, like Adolf Hitler, extremely good at rhetoric. That is a cynical example of getting people to act against their own interest and do things, essentially support monstrous things through the art of rhetoric. So there's a good and a bad side of this. So our gig is to look at this art. Yes, I do like to specify or highlight the idea that this is an art. And we want to look at how speakers are effective and persuasive in their speaking and writing. How is it that they do this? How do these speakers and writers make this art? Okay, how do they use figures of speech, and what are these other compositional techniques they can use to actually make something persuasive? Now, this is accomplishable at essentially every level of communication. Let me give you an example that's probably way too oversimplified, that we can first start our analysis with. And when I say analysis, when we analyze rhetoric, we're looking closely at the choices speakers and writers make to be effective and persuasive. We are looking at what they did. You'll hear this idea referenced a couple times through this presentation. Remember, any speaker, any writer, they started with a blank slate. There was nothing there. So they made choices. They included certain details. They used certain techniques to make their appeals more persuasive. And they made those up from nothing, right? That wasn't there. They made choices. There's not like a stock thing you can make to do that. So we're going to be looking at how they effectively do that and eventually applying those skills for ourselves. But like I promised, this is done at every level. A super oversimplified example might be like this. This is an ineffective example of rhetoric, by the way. This is before Johnny thought things out and applied these skills of persuasion in his communication. Little Johnny is preparing to talk to his mom about going out with friends this weekend. He has good grades, and it's his pal Tommy's birthday. He peeks his head in and he says, "Going out, Mom, bye." Now, if your childhood was much like mine, You may know what the response is likely to be here, right? Mom's probably not going to be thrilled to hear that sort of address, and certainly not convinced to allow him to go out, right? So let's consider what would have happened if Johnny had been a bit more cognizant of the circumstances around his request here. How would he use rhetoric to improve his chances of success? Okay. Same scenario. Remember, Johnny has good grades and it's his pal Tommy's birthday. This time he goes with, "Hey mom, since I've been working really hard lately, do you mind if I go out to IHOP and get some birthday pancakes with Tommy?" Aha! This is a much more effective example of rhetoric. Let's look at the choices he made here. Well, first off, what differences do you notice? What are some things that he did differently that you notice that may have improved his odds of success? Okay. What did he do here differently than the ineffective version? You notice anything? Let's take a close look. So here's our effective example again. First things first. Hey, mom, since I've been working really hard lately, we already know that Johnny's grades have been good lately. So here, Johnny uses that important detail to sway his mom's decision that his grades have been good lately. He doesn't say it directly, but he alludes to it, as we'd call it. So you might even call that a figurative device. He makes an allusion to those grades that he's referring to, right? Also, he includes another important detail. It's Johnny's best friend forever's B-Day, BFF's B-Day. It's can't miss stuff. He's got to go, right? It's Tommy's birthday. You don't want to miss out on that. And lastly, he considered his audience's values and stature. Compared to the ineffective example, Johnny remembers his mom's position of authority as a parent, and he asks, he does not tell. So remember, all this was done from a blank slate. He peeked in to his mom's bedroom or the living room or wherever, and he started out with a blank slate. He could have filled it however he chose. But in this case, likely a case that some of you are at least somewhat familiar with, he applied rhetorical choices to improve his chance of persuasive success, right? So this is a really simplified, basic example, but it shows to us that rhetoric is applicable at all levels of communication. Okay? But this is the idea that we're going to be looking at a lot throughout this year. How rhetoric is more effective, what choices are made by speakers and authors, how and why they were effective, and of course, how can we use this for ourselves to be better, more effective communicators throughout our academic and eventually our adult life. Okay. Well, I said all levels, right? So we're going to take it a little bit further. Now, again, right now we have a couple of terms that we've nailed down, right? Rhetoric and rhetorical analysis. Okay. So what I'm about to show you right now, this process I'm about to do for you here, is not intended to necessarily be a direct teaching tool. It's just to show you what analysis of rhetoric looks like in action. Okay. What I would do as an analyzer of slightly higher tier rhetoric than just Johnny asking his mom to go out, what I would do to model this process for you guys. So less academically speaking, I'm kind of showing off. I don't know. We'll see. So what we're going to look at is a famous example of rhetoric in drama. This is going to be two brief excerpts from William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and this famous scene here is after Caesar has been killed. Spoiler alert. Sorry. By Brutus and his other co-conspirators. And Brutus initially, Brutus admits to the citizens of Rome what he and the others have done, and he is trying to convince them via rhetoric that what he has done, killing Caesar, was right. The second part of this is Antony. He is the closest confidant of Caesar, and he is going to attempt to use rhetoric to prove that the killing of Caesar was wrong. Okay, so we have two very different sides here, and we're going to see how each of them applies rhetoric. Okay, let's get to it.
Romans, countrymen, and lovers, hear me for my cause, and be silent that you may hear. Believe me for mine honor, and have respect to mine honor that you may believe. Censure me in your wisdom, and awake your senses that you may the better judge. If there be any in this assembly, any dear friend of Caesar's, to him I say that Brutus' love to Caesar was no less than his.
Okay, so first things first. As an analyzer of rhetoric, again, these are skills and tools that I will impart to you over the course of the year. So don't freak out if don't be overwhelmed. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to minimize how you might feel, but don't be overwhelmed and say like, "Oh, I didn't even notice this." Don't stress. These are all skills that we'll learn, but I'm just showing you how they're applied. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to note here is that Brutus knows a lot of the folks in the crowd loved Caesar. So he makes sure to highlight his own love for Caesar too. He is doing what we would call recognizing or respecting the values of his audience. He knows his audience is of people who loved Caesar, right? And since he's kind of convincing them to not, brutally murder him right there in the street for killing Caesar, it's a good idea for him to recognize that and to say, "Hey, right there with you guys, don't worry." And let's see what he does with this, though.
If then that friend demand why Brutus rose against Caesar, this is my answer. Not that I loved Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more.
Aha. Another value of Roman citizens is that they love Rome. He's referring to them, right? I loved Caesar too. This was not about my love for Caesar. This was about my love for you guys, right? It's my love for Rome and you. That's what drove me to do this. Let's hear some explanation here, pal. I'm not convinced yet.
Had you rather Caesar were living to die all slaves, than that Caesar were dead to live all free men?
Aha, a rhetorical question. Would you rather be slaves with Caesar alive or be free men with him dead? Is this sacrifice worth your freedom as Rome? Because what Brutus is getting at here is that Caesar was trying to be a tyrant. He was working his way toward essentially, an autocracy with him in charge. So would you rather he die and be free or him living with you, his slaves? All right. It's a rhetorical question. It's not meant to be answered. The answer is meant to be obvious, but he's doing it to prove a point, right? In this case, that you are all better off with Caesar, 6 feet under, as it were.
As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him, but as he was ambitious, I slew him. There is tears for his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death for his ambition.
Okay. So Brutus notes Caesar's good deeds, right? But he notes that Caesar's ambition was his downfall, right? I honored him for his valor. I loved him for his, I appreciated his love. I celebrated his fortunes and his successes. But when he grew too ambitious, I killed him for the sake of Rome. Okay, so Brutus is going about this very logically, right? He goes on to, I'm not going to let him finish up here in the interest of time, but he goes on to kind of wrap things up and say, I did this all for you. And if any of you would have done something different, knowing the stakes, then you can punish me. And everyone pretty much agrees, yep, Caesar deserved to die. You're right, Brutus. Good job. Okay. So now let's go on to the other side of this. Right? I said this is a famous back and forth, right? Not just one side. So we're going to start off here. This is a different production, obviously. Brutus is the first person speaking.
My countrymen!
This is Brutus.
Good countrymen, let me depart alone, and for my sake, stay here with Antony. Do grace to Caesar's corpse, and grace his speech, tending to Caesar's glories, which Mark Antony, by our permission, is allowed to make. I do entreat you, Not a man depart, save I alone, till Antony have spoken.
Stay home. Let us hear Mark Antony. We'll hear him. Noble Antony, go up. Go up. Speak, Lord. Speak.
For Brutus' sake, I am beholding to you.
Now, what does he say of Brutus? For best he speaks, no harm of Brutus here. Caesar was a tyrant.
All right, so Brutus has won, right? Brutus has this crowd on his side. Caesar was a tyrant. Speak no ill of Brutus here, right? So Mark Antony has a job to do, right? He has a different goal. He is in favor of Caesar here. He is against Caesar's death. He's going to go about this way differently than Brutus did. Brutus went all logic, right? And you're going to see Mark Antony use logic here too, but he's going to use a lot of emotion to back his argument as well. So right off the bat, we're going to hear Brutus was an honorable man, and we're going to see how that phrase right there, the repetition of that phrase, is used rhetorically in this example.
Yes, that Rome is legal. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus have told you Caesar was ambitious. If it was so, it was a grievous fault. And grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here under leave of Brutus and the rest. For Brutus is an honorable man.
There it is.
So are they all honorable men? Come I to speak in Caesar's funeral? He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious?
So right quick, you can feel the emotional Antony starting to bring to this equation that Brutus did not as much anyway, right? Antony also is going to answer Brutus's charge of ambition with multiple specific details. You just heard the first one, right? He filled the general coffers with ransoms brought home from war. Did he seem ambitious there? Essentially, when he funded the government with his exploits of war. A few more examples to follow, just so you know that's what he's doing.
When that the poor hath cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal, I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he is an honorable man.
So when he's saying Brutus is an honorable man now, is he really saying that? Or is he saying it ironically? Is the repetition meant to be ironic? In other words, is he bringing up this idea of Brutus's honor to actually say he is honorable? Or is he repeating this idea to make the people go like, oh, wait, this Brutus dude's a snake, right? So that repetition, essentially he's arguing against that repetition. He's arguing against this idea that Caesar was ambitious and Brutus therefore was honorable in killing him. He's arguing against that. So every time he says it, the audience is going like, wait a second. So Brutus, very good speaker, very good with rhetoric. Mark Antony, not one to mess with on the rhetoric side. He is exceptional here.
I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? Oh, judgment! Thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason.
So the men have lost their reason. You guys have gone crazy, right? And eventually he succeeds. If you're familiar with the plot of Caesar, he whips the crowd up so much against Brutus and mourning for Caesar's death that they essentially form an angry mob and violently chase Brutus and the other conspirators out of Rome, killing some folks along the way. So, and that starts the whole war that Caesar focuses on. So, yeah, that's an example of rhetoric in literature, just a famous example that some of you may have read, others just to show you that it's there on multiple levels, be it Johnny trying to convince his mom to go out, or, Shakespeare's Caesar between Brutus and Antony. So the next dot is rhetorical situation. So how is all of this done? How is that rhetorical analysis done? Okay, there's quite a bit that goes into it. But the first skill we're going to add is how to examine what's called the rhetorical situation. Okay, this is essentially block one of a bunch of skills we're going to put together in order to look at a piece of rhetoric that we just did right there, those two, and to be able to really pull that apart, kind of like you just saw done there. Okay, so the rhetorical situation. You can think of this as the context or set of circumstances out of which a text arises. For example, what's the relationship between the speaker and audience? What's going on in the world, the wider world, when the text is delivered? And what event or spark is the text in response to? What led to the creation of this text in the first place? To examine the many elements of rhetorical situation, we use the frankly adorable acronym Space Cat, for which there is an equally adorable presentation, as promised. So, each letter there, Space Cat, stands for something. It's an acronym, right? The first letter, S, is for speaker. So one of the first things we look at of a text is who spoke it or who wrote it. Who is the speaker for this text? What do we know about them? What don't we know about them? And does this text have a particular meaning because of who said it or who wrote it? A couple of examples: a president giving a speech, a citizen sending a tweet, a newspaper staff writing an editorial. Each of those would be the speaker of that given text. And yes, a tweet counts as rhetoric, right? Absolutely, especially in this day and age. Okay. Next is purpose. Remember, Space Cat, SP, purpose. What is the speaker hoping to accomplish by putting this text out into the world? Remember that the message itself is not the purpose necessarily, right? For example, to inform, to persuade an audience of something, to inspire an audience to do something, to convince. Note that the purpose can be more specific too, like using humor as an icebreaker to prepare an audience for a tough love speech. Okay? I'll show you exactly how that works in just a minute. So S and P are speaker and purpose. Next has to be A, right? Audience. Who was the actual audience of this text? Was that the intended audience? Is the audience already on the speaker's side? What did the speaker assume about their audience? What are the audience's values? How does that impact what they say and how they say it? So, for example, TV viewers watching a debate, readers of a newspaper, a crowd gathered at a rally are all examples of audience. Next is context. What was going on in the immediate environment and the wider world when this text was produced? In other words, what was the event the person was speaking at, and also what was going on in the world around that event when this stuff happened? What were the biggest issues on the speaker's mind, which they might be directly or indirectly addressing? That's kind of the wider world that we're referring to. How would this same text be received differently by a different audience or in a different time? So, for example, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech is given in the wider context of the civil rights movement and in the immediate context of, whoa, the Million Man March. Was that? I apologize. I need to brush up on my history. You caught me with myself not ready. Exigence. Why this text at this time for this speaker? Okay, exigence is the first word that we might see that we're not quite familiar with here. It essentially means the spark. What inspired, what immediate thing happened to make this text be written, right? So what was the spark or catalyst that moved the speaker to act? Note that context is happening all the time, but usually a specific event or series of events serves as exigence. For example, a few years ago, we had the Me Too movement taking off after high-profile reports of sexual misconduct against women. Like Harvey Weinstein was the big movie producer who a lot of women came out and said that he had sexually abused them or something thereabouts. And all of those reports together served as the exigence for the start of the Me Too movement. It came in response to those. Okay, so it was the spark that inspired the creation of that movement. All right. Next is choices. The next three, the cat bit. It's not. Yeah, I mean, it's still. They're very important for rhetorical analysis. They're not necessarily quite as much part of the rhetorical situation, but this acronym is useful beyond just situation. Choices is a category of all the little moves authors make to enrich their writing. Why does the writer make each choice? So, for example, a speechwriter may begin with an anecdote, then move to describing a process of change, and then end with a call to action. You also saw choices with Johnny's speech to his mom and Brutus and Antony's speeches to the plebeians of Rome. Okay. Appeals. Appeals to ethics or credibility are called ethos. Appeals to emotion fall under pathos. Some say pathos. I like pathos because empathy, sympathy, come on. And appeals to logic or reason fall under logos. Examples: bringing up one's expertise with the topic would inspire credibility. Telling a moving story could activate emotion, and stating facts or statistics would be logic. And lastly, we have tone. What is the speaker's attitude at different places throughout the text? How can you tell that this is their attitude? Where does the tone shift in the piece? Examples: a religious eulogy may begin with a mournful tone, then move to a comforting or inspirational tone. See how that works? So, rhetorical analysis requires you to read and understand what matters about a text and comment on what specific features make it rich or effective. Don't panic when exploring a new or difficult text. Space Cat will guide you to the unknown. Anywho, a couple of quick questions on space. All right, moving on. Let's look at Space Cat in a real AP Lang example. The passage below is the opening to a speech made in 1960. I'm sorry. Let's try that again. So, when you come across the AP Lang's rhetorical analysis essay, the test, you'll be given an introduction like this and then the text to analyze, right? The introduction to that text is where you find a ton of rhetorical situation information. Now, we'll do a whole bunch of prep on this test, obviously, but as we get closer to it. But I wanted to use a specific example from one of these test essays so you can see what these prompts look like, and also just so you can see how rhetorical situation fits in here. So, here is the actual introduction that preceded the text for analysis, and I want you to pay attention to elements of space or rhetorical situation here that occur or that are illuminated just in this introduction alone. The passage below is the opening to a speech made in 1960 by American journalist and politician Claire Booth Luce to journalists at the Women's National Press Club. In this speech, Luce went on to criticize the tendency of the American press to sacrifice journalistic integrity in favor of the perceived public demand for sensationalist stories. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well-developed essay, analyze how Luce uses this introduction to prepare the audience for her message. All right, that's actually the prompt, but what we're just looking at is just what rhetorical situation elements are already made clear by this introduction alone? So take just a second to examine that. All right, let's wrap up. I want you to see, again, I want to model this process of using Space Cat for a speech, because you guys are going to be doing some Space Catting of your own at the conclusion of this. So remember those steps that we discussed. Watch how we use those individual categories: Space Cat, speaker, purpose, audience, context, exigence, choices, appeals, and tone to gain an understanding of a work as a whole. This is a graduation speech for the class of 2020, one that you guys know was, I mean, they lost, the last quarter of their school year, and it was just a whole mess, right? So here we go.
At this time, I'm
going to fast forward just a bit to her, okay? There we go.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the class of 2020, I'd like to welcome family, friends, staff, alumni, and faculty. Thank you for being here tonight, especially during this unprecedented time. I would like to also thank the Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District for their grace and dedication in helping us hold this ceremony to celebrate our hard work. My name is Oluwatoyin Odufuye, and I know that this is not how we envisioned our senior year would go. I have one request for my classmates tonight. Give light. And by this, I mean love one another and be positive, because you never know when one kind word or smile can turn someone's day around and light them up. I know that this class can do anything we set our minds to, and that we can use our ideas and inner light to brighten all the dark places, the injustice, inequality, plague, and hatred in this world. These things are not strong if we do not give them power, if we choose light, especially when it is hard. Kindness ripples, so please do not be afraid to give and receive it. Again, thank you for coming, and have a good night.
That's what you call a nice little tight 90-second speech right there. Woof. She got a lot of work done. Okay, so before I Space Cat this for you, don't forget, this speech came from nothing. At one point, Odufoye was staring at a blank notebook or Google Doc. She used specific words and specific details to create a specific effect and accomplish a specific purpose. She went off, I want to do this with my speech. Now she made a bunch of choices to get from point A, a blank doc or notebook, to point Z, the completed speech. Our gig as analyzers is to look at those choices. As analyzers of rhetoric, I just said this, but our job is to look very closely at the moves she made, why, and what effects she created. We're like CSI text or something. Ooh, that's us. Except way cooler or less cool, I guess, depending on your taste. So, with no further ado, here is my Space Cat of her speech. So notice we have all our categories: speaker, purpose, audience, context, exigence, choices, appeals, and tone. Speaker, Tony Odufoye, the senior president of Cypress Ranch High School's class of 2020. Some of this, just so you guys know, I got from the YouTube videos, like a little about bit, like the introduction to it. So again, always read introductions, folks. You never know what you'll find there. So her purpose, in my estimation, my opinion of her purpose was to convince her classmates to give light, to be optimistic, kind, etc. in a world that needs light. And again, I want to remind you, this wasn't a pre-done thing. I did this. Okay, so she wrote her speech from zero to all the way. I've analyzed from zero to all the way. So this is not any artificial application. This is like real world stuff. This was just me sitting in my living room going nuts. Audience. Odufoye's peers in the graduating class of 2020 at Cypress Ranch High School, plus faculty. Her wider audience may have been those who have watched that YouTube video, and there have been lots, but I doubt she was really considering that. Context, there's lots here. The immediate context, of course, is this is a commencement speech. Outside that, however, though, the wider world context, conflicts over race and policing, masks, pandemic conspiracies, you name it, are all over TV, TikTok, and Twitter. Shoot, you can add election conspiracies too while you're at it. Shortly after, I guess she graduated, but very much not a wider world where giving light is habitual at this point, right? So her purpose seems to be a fitting one, given all of the conflict happening in the wider world around this rhetoric. Her exigence. Why this speech at this moment? What is the spark for this? Well, there's some overlap with context, I would say, but the class of 2020 has had a rough year, and it's about to enter a world that is rife with anger, pain, and anxiety, and it needs a positive message. It needs inspiration to spread positivity. Okay. Choices. I mainly looked at three, or I guess you could say two, that she connected to one another. But Odufoye alludes or makes reference to the unprecedented challenges of the day that have led to a senior year that wasn't what she and her classmates had, quote, envisioned. She also metaphorically implores graduates to give light to dark places, first referring to simple interactions like, a kind smile or something like that, but then to the confronting of larger issues like injustice, inequality, plague, and hatred, which she suggests her class is uniquely able to do by connecting the aforementioned challenges they've already conquered, right? She is essentially choosing to make reference to those things, and choosing to metaphorically use light to tell her classmates to spread or give light in response to those things, charging them with being the generation that heals a lot of these divides. Good luck. So the appeals she uses, we're talking about credibility, logic, and emotion. The two that I kind of pointed out, her ethos is kind of automatic, right? She's a respected peer and class president, so her credibility is already kind of there for at least most of her class. She references her class's challenges and triumphs to soothe her audience and to inspire confidence. Those are both emotional things, right? To soothe their concerns and their anxieties, and to inspire confidence, which is another emotion. And lastly, her tone. Uplifting, empowering. Odufoye's focus on ideas like love and unity and community while charging her peers with combating negativity and hatred that are, quote, not strong like her audience. So she's uplifting them with these ideas of love and unity and community and empowering them to spread those things by saying these forces of negativity they're about to confront are not strong like her audience is. Okay? So that is how Space Cat works. Notice how I've taken a 90-second speech and I have really, really tried to dig into what made it an effective speech in just 90 seconds, right? You have to think of it from lots of different angles to be effective analyzers of rhetoric. And I'm excited to see you guys do it for yourselves. So, what follows now after this lecture that you guys have now completed, congratulations, is the application of Space Cat to a pair of texts for yourselves. Those will be on Google Classroom just after this. Like as far as the units lined up goes, the two things that you're going to Space Cat, as it were, are a piece by Frederick Douglass, Learning to Read and Write, and a piece. The second piece, oh my gosh, I can't remember. They'll be there. Sorry, guys. Oof. It's been a long summer already. Wait, you can always ask questions by emailing me or commenting on the assignment. I will definitely see either one. I wish you the best of luck, and don't forget, feel free to refer back to this presentation as necessary. Go Big Blue, guys.